Well, good morning, Grace. Glad to have you out here in the house of the Lord. And to celebrate and to worship together with us and to grow in His Word. Okay, I see a problem. That's not going to want to stay in Exodus 12. My Bible doesn't like it. There we go. Come on, stay there. But you know what I wanted to do today? I wanted to take a week and kind of step back from Luke. To give us a context, you know, the next place that we're going in the chapter, in chapter 22, starting next week, is dealing with the celebration that John just read for us this morning about the Passover. And it's going to, what we kind of know about it a lot of times is the Last Supper. The Leonardo da Vinci, I guess the painting with that, where he and his disciples eat their last meal together. It's kind of the last 24 hours of Jesus' life before the cross. And but before we get there, a lot of times we read that story, and we really don't have a lot of context for it. We don't understand. For them, for the Israelites, it had huge implications. It was the foundation, one of the foundational things that they celebrated every year. And so I want to kind of look at the context this week. So we're not going to be in Luke, but we're going to be looking at what is it that lays that foundation for seeing that Last Supper, that meal happen in Luke next week. And we look at kind of like this festival and why it was celebrated. And want to kind of also look at like why, by the foreknowledge of God, did Jesus choose this festival to be the one where the Son of God would die. I don't believe it's any accident that he happens to die this weekend at this festival at this time. But by God's design and plan, this is the one that he wanted to put up as the main reason for his coming. Otherwise, he wouldn't probably have chosen this. There's other ones he could have, right? If you know anything about this, and we did this back in Leviticus, if you are interested, go back and read those, or watch those videos if you haven't. I recommend you going through the book of Leviticus in entirety. You'll learn a lot. You can't understand Jesus. I don't believe you can fully understand Jesus and what he's about if you don't understand Leviticus. Those who are here will understand that. But there's 7 major festivals that happen in the Jews, right, that they would celebrate. And we walked through them all when we did that. But there are kind of 2 that I think most Christians are at least familiar with. Some of them, the others, maybe less familiar with. And I think there are 2. It's this one, the Passover, and the second is Yom Kippur. Okay? So the Passover, or the Pesach meal is known as, and Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. And I believe many Christians, even, they understand these 2, but I believe often what happens is there's this conflating of these 2 days often together, and a lot of mixing together of metaphors and things that happen between them. I'll be the first to admit, you can go back, I still have them, they're still online at the church I was a part of back in Nebraska. I taught through Leviticus, this would have been 2014, first time I went through it. And go back and listen to it, and there's a lot of conflating of the 2 things. I put them all together. But as I studied more and I learned more, I realized that there is something unique about what's happening here. I think it's a very beautiful picture. And so we'll cover Yom Kippur actually in a couple weeks. Even though Jesus actually we don't see him celebrate it at this time. He does it in another place, but not here. And that's a day that's dealing with sin in Israel. The one day a year you've heard about the priest entering in the Holy of Holies and offering up the blood and the sacrifice and all that, the one time a year. That's actually Yom Kippur. That has nothing to do with our day to day. Yom Kippur Passover was not a celebration around Jesus' death. Sorry, let me say that again. Yom Kippur, see, that's what I'm saying. I think I wrote it wrong in my notes. I'm like, that's not right. I'll not look at my notes. Yom Kippur is the day that deals with sin. The dealing of the Passover has a completely other function to it. We'll get to the day of dealing with sin as we get to it, but there's some things that we need to learn here. So I'm going to look at today at Exodus chapter 12. And thank you for reading through that. I know it's long. Sometimes we go through these long passages and we go, oh, there's a lot of repetition, but I think they're vital for understanding what's going on. Give you a little bit of a setting. If you don't know, some of you already know the story of the Exodus, but give you a little bit of a setting. At the end of Genesis, right, Jacob and his family, he has 12 sons. He's renamed Israel, and it's one of his sons, Joseph, that gets sent off to slavery in Egypt, and he rises up through the ranks and becomes number 2 in Egypt. And there's a famine that happens, and God provides through Joseph's provision and his God using him to provide food to all of Egypt and also to his family. When he brings them into Egypt, he provides for them, and God blesses the people that were a part of Joseph's family. But you get into Exodus, the beginning of Exodus, the people began to multiply. They stayed there in Egypt, and they began to be fruitful and multiply, right? Just as God said that they should do, and God blessed them, and they became so numerous. But what happened? It says in the beginning that a Pharaoh rose up that did not know Joseph and had forgotten about that relationship and sees a people that are getting way too big for his comfortability. And what does he do? He enslaves them. He's going to use them to build his cities and enslave them and keep them under his hand. And so for 400 years, the people are in Egypt in slavery, seemingly forgotten by God. But God calls, if you know the story, God calls Moses to rise up. He talks to him at a bush and tells him, you're going to go and release my people from Egypt, and you're going to bring them to the land that I had promised to Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. And in that process, if you've seen Prince of Egypt or 10 Commandments, I like 10 Commandments, even though it's not historically accurate. You got to love Charlton Heston. Still good. But God does what? He sends 10 strikes against Egypt. 10 different ways that he's going to show them, as he says over and over and over. 7 times he says, so that the people of Egypt will know that I am Yahweh. They will know me, and then ultimately that you Jews, you people of God, that will know me, that I am Yahweh. And the first 9, the blood in the Nile and the hail and the gnats and the flies and all the different things. But in chapter 12, we finally see, chapter 11 leads up to it, we're going to see this 10th strike against Egypt. What is the 10th strike? He's going to bring what? Death to the firstborn. The firstborn, not just of people, but of animals as well. God's 10th strike is going to hit and is going to send the destroyer through the land, and he will take out the firstborn of all of Egypt and anybody that does not go through what we saw in chapter 12. So I want to pick up there. I want to kind of walk through these, and we're going to go through it a little bit quickly, but I want to kind of walk through this. If you have your Bible, it would also be up here. Chapter 12, verses 1. It says, Yahweh said to Moses and Aaron in the land of Egypt, this month is to be the beginning of months. It will be the first month of the year. And he's starting off saying this is going to be a new event that's going to start everything all over. This is key to who you are. This is how you start your year off, with this event. Tell the whole community of Israel, on the 10th day of this month, they each must take a lamb for themselves, according to their family, a lamb for each household. And if any household is too small for a lamb, the man and his next door neighbor are to take a lamb according to the number of people, and you will make your count for the lamb according to how much each one can eat. So Moses starts off by telling them, right, every family, not every individual, right, but every family is to do what? Go get a lamb, and he'll say later that could be from the sheep or the goats, and bring it into your house. And if you don't have enough money for a lamb, you're poor, what can you also do? You can be a part of somebody else's household, coming into their place and being a part of this. God will provide for everyone, no matter what, that wants to come and trust in him, right? So he's going to do that. No one's left out. Keep going. Verses 5. He says, your lamb must be a perfect male, 1 year old. You must take it in from the sheep or from the goats. You must care for it until the 14th day of the month. And when the whole community of Israel will kill it around sundown, they will take some blood and put it on the 2 side posts on the side of the door and above the door frame above of the houses where they eat it. So he says, what I want you to do on the 10th day, you're going to bring a lamb into your home, 1 year old, perfect, spotless. And after 4 days, right, just enough time for the kids to do what? Name it, Fluffy, right? Get nice and comfortable with it. But you are to bring it into your home. You're to identify with it. It's to be a part of your family, and then you are to what? To kill it. And take the blood, which we'll see more as we go in the rest of Luke, as we're going to slow way down in Luke. The last 3 chapters all have happened in 24 hours. We're going to slow down. But the blood, which represents life, is applied. I'm going to apply it to the doorposts, right? And he goes further. He says, after that, in verse 8, they will eat the meat the same night, and they will eat it roasted over the fire with bread made without yeast and with bitter herbs. He says, first off, so you're going to kill this lamb, take its blood first and put it over the doorposts. You're going to bring the lamb in. You're going to roast it over the fire. Don't boil it, but you're going to roast it over the fire, and you're going to consume all of it that night. And not only that, you're going to have bread, which is unleavened, has no yeast in it, in a sense. It's not going to have that to something you've got to remove from your house. All of the things that shouldn't belong, to represent all the sin, all the things out of your house. And also, you're going to have bitter herbs to remind you that you've been what? In bitter slavery for 400 years. They're reminders about what's going on. Do not eat it raw or boiled, but roast it over the fire with its head, its legs, and entrails. You must leave nothing until morning. You must burn it with fire, whatever remains, until the morning. This is how you are to eat it, dressed to travel, your sandals in your feet, your staff in your hand, and eat it in haste. This is Yahweh's Passover. So this is what he says here, and they're saying, right, once the lamb is killed, you apply the blood, you eat the meal together of all these things, and you do it ready to go. Because when God shows up, what? Be ready to move. Okay, keep going. Verse 12, I will pass through the land of Egypt in the same night. I will attack all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, both humans and animals, and on all of the gods of Egypt I will execute judgment. I am Yahweh. Remember that. I am Yahweh. The blood will be a sign for you on the house where you are. Who's the blood a sign for? It's interesting. The blood is a sign for you. All right? So that when I see the blood, I will pass over. That's where we get this, right? Pass over you, and this plague will not fall on you and destroy you when I attack the land of Egypt. So Yahweh's messenger is going to go through the land and destroy the firstborn. But anyone with the blood of the lamb applied to their household will live. They will not die. He will pass over them, right? Let's read a little further. 14. This day will become a memorial for you, and you will celebrate it as a festival to Yahweh. You will celebrate it perpetually as a lasting ordinance. For 7 days you must eat bread without yeast. Surely on the first day you must put away yeast from your households. Anyone who eats bread with yeast from the first day to the seventh day will be cut off from Israel. It's a serious thing. 16, on the first day there will be a holy convocation. On the seventh day there will be a holy convocation for you. You must not do work of any kind. They take a whole week off, a whole week of Sabbath. Right? It's an 8-day thing. The day before the Sabbath, you kill the lamb, and then you start this ritual. Okay? And it says, every person will eat alone, and that alone may be prepared for you, so that you will keep the feast of unleavened bread, because on this very day I brought your regiments out of the land of Egypt, and so you must keep this day perpetually as a lasting ordinance. Now, there's a lot here, okay? I'm just dumping it all on you. It'll come together, I promise. So he says, this is to be a what? A memorial. On this day, every year, you're to eat and celebrate Yahweh's deliverance. This is what you're to do from this moment on, and sometime in 1500-ish AD, perpetually, every single year at this day, you will celebrate this. Why? Because this is vastly important to understanding what God is doing for his people. Don't forget this, he says. If you can forget anything else, don't forget this. And now you'll be reminded of it every single year. And then 18 through 25, he goes on and is Moses telling the people some of the same things. Jump ahead to 26. He says, and when your children ask you, what does this ceremony mean to you? Then you will say, it is a sacrifice of Yahweh's Passover. When he passed over the house of the Israelites in Egypt, he struck Egypt and delivered our households. The people bowed low to the ground, and the Israelites went away and did exactly as Yahweh had commanded Moses and Aaron. Then when the children ask you why, you say, this is the sacrifice of Yahweh's Passover. Side note, by the way, if you don't know, and we'll say more of this coming up soon, but March 29th, mark your calendars. I love Jeremy and Alyssa had this idea. I think it was you all had the idea. And we're going to be actually working with our children on that Wednesday night, March 29th, with families and kids to come, and they're going to set up a Passover Seder meal in order to teach our kids, but also to teach us to come and understand and celebrate what this meal was about. So we'll have more information on that, but put that in your brain, March 29th, you can see it happening. No, he says, though, when they ask, this is to be a sacrifice of Yahweh's Passover. Interestingly, this is the only time right here in verse 26 so 27, that this phrase is ever used. The phrase is the Zevach Peshach. Okay, the Zevach Peshach. And the Zevach is the same word used, go back again if you want to listen to the sermon, of the fellowship offering in Leviticus 3. And if you know anything about the fellowship offering, is the only offering of an animal that you gave that had nothing to do with what? Sin, had nothing to do with sin. Why would you give a fellowship? Or sometimes in Leviticus 3, it's the Shalom, it's the Zevach Shalamim, or the offering of peace. Not to gain peace, but because you are at peace. And this one was unique. God gave, this is the only one where God did what with some of the animal? He gives it back to you so that you might share it in a communal meal together. It's the only other place that this is mentioned. And so, in a sense, Moses is saying here that this offering of this lamb and its blood is to be a peace or a fellowship offering that you share with other people. What happens in the eating of it? You share it with your whole family and even other families that may come in, right? It's a sharing of this that's growing together. You are to celebrate what Yahweh has done and because of who He is, and do it in a communal meal. This meal is a celebration, one of remembrance for what He's done, and it's shared. It's not a focus, though, on this. Hear this. This meal is not a focus, and this death is not a focus on sin. It is not a meal and focus on repentance. It is a meal that does what? That looks back and remembers what Yahweh has done for you. And there are aspects of it that grow in time to look forward about what He'll do one day. And I love it. It ends. This one is actually, it's about sin and repentance. It's about deliverance and rescue. I'll show you in a minute. And the people, I love it. It ends with, they bowed down, they went away and said, we will do what Yahweh has commanded. So what in this day is about what's happening? What in this day happens? What happens to the people for their good that God does in this Passover? What does it point to? Why did God choose this day to do it? And it's two things. He's doing two things, and they both deal with deliverance. Two things for His people. He delivers them from what? Slavery, and He's delivering them from what? Death. This day is a celebration of Yahweh delivering from slavery and delivering from death. And Yahweh would rescue His people from their master here. Who's their master here? Who are they enslaved to? Egypt. And He's going to break the chains of slavery, and by the blood of the Lamb, He would rescue them from death. That sound familiar? Well, what about the bigger picture? What about the works of Jesus that we've been talking about and we're starting to look forward to? If you've been listening, if you have any background in church, you've probably heard a lot of buzzwords, right? You've heard a lot of familiar things here. What did the work of Jesus, what did this Passover that we're looking at in Luke that's just starting, what does it point to? Why did God choose this day of all days to come and to die? To bring the greater Passover. Because here's the reality. Jesus, as the Passover lamb, would do two things for His people. What would He do? He would deliver His people from slavery and death. This is what Jesus' death accomplishes. This is its great purpose. And how do we know? How do we know this is what it's about? Deliverance from slavery and death? Because Jesus chose this festival to die. To say, this is what it's about. This is what it all leads to. I have chosen this so you might understand why I've come. But the master here is different, isn't it? It's no longer a master. The master is not Egypt. What's the new master? Sin. His people in Exodus were bound by the Egyptians. But the reality, the greater reality is all of God's people, everyone created in His image, are bound by a greater master, and that is of sin. And like Egypt, it needed to be destroyed. Because sin enslaves us, and it brings us only what? Death. But I'm going to disappoint you a little bit. Don, wherever you are, I'm sorry. I'm going to disappoint you a little bit. You're going to have to wait a few weeks to see how he defeats this sin. Because this is not the festival to talk about that. That's Yom Kippur. So patience. It's coming. Patience. But what I want to do, I want to go a little bit further with this. I want to focus for a moment like what follows the celebration in Exodus, because I believe it gives a crucial understanding of the gospel we often miss. Because like I said, I think we conflate the two too often. This with Yom Kippur. I've done it myself. Look with me, turn over to Exodus chapter 19. I'm going to go through these very quickly. Exodus 19, so God brings them out, the Red Sea's parted, all of that. He brings them to a place that he's got for them. Where does he bring them first? Where's their first destination to get to? Where does God want to bring them to first? He's brought them out of Egypt, and he brings them where? To Mount Sinai, right? But for what purpose? What purpose? Why did God bring the people to Mount Sinai? I heard someone over here. I heard law. Or who said that? Law. I also heard something over here. Covenant. This is the mistake. Nothing yet. We often think that the point of bringing the people to Sinai was to give them the law. That is not the reason God brings them to Sinai. That is an outflowing of it, but that is not the reason. He brings them there first and foremost to make a covenant with his people, to bring them into relationship. And often if we think about it, when we think about Sinai, we only think about the law, right? 10 Commandments. That's what the movie's called, right? It all goes to the 10 Commandments, right? Let's look in Leviticus 19 real quick. I'm going to read through this kind of quickly. 3rd month, the Israelites went out. So it was 3 months later. And very day they came to the desert of Sinai. They journeyed from Rephidim. They came to the desert of Sinai. Actually, let me jump to verse 3. Moses went up to God. So they get there. Moses went to God, and Yahweh called him from the mountain. Thus you will tell the house of Jacob and declare to the people of Israel, you yourselves have seen what I did in Egypt, how I lifted you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. There's the rescue. And now if you will diligently listen to me and keep my covenant, then you will be my special possession. If you keep my covenant that I'm about to make with you, you will be my special possession of all the nations. I'm making this special with you. For all the earth is mine, and you will be a kingdom of priests. You will be the go-between between me and other people. And you will be a holy nation, consecrated, set apart for him. These are the words that you will speak to the Israelites. So Moses came, summoned the elders, and he set before them all these words that Yahweh commanded. And all the people answered, here it is again, all that Yahweh has commanded, we will do, right? Second time. So Moses brought the words to the people back to Yahweh. So Moses comes down, says, this is what God's got for you. Will you do it? Yes, okay. And Moses does what? Goes back up the mountain. And what happens in chapter 20? Anybody? That's where he gives the law. And you go, oh, law's next. Hold up. That's where Moses gets the law. But before he gets the law, look at chapter 24. He just is told the law, and he starts writing it down. Look at 24. But to Moses, Yahweh said, come up to Yahweh, you and Aaron and Nadab and Abihu, the high priest and his sons, and 70 of the elders of Israel, representatives, all of Israel, and worship from a distance. Moses alone may come near to Yahweh, but others must not come near, nor may the people go up with him. And Moses came and told all the people Yahweh's words and their decisions. All the people answered together, here it is again, we are willing to do all the words that Yahweh has said. And Moses wrote them down, the words of Yahweh. Early in the morning, he built an altar at the foot of the mountain, the 12 stones, representative. There's those stones again. According to the 12 tribes. He sent the Israelite men, they had burnt offerings and sacrificed young bulls for what? Peace offerings. There that is again. Fascinating. They're at peace. Moses took half the blood, put it in bowls, and half of the blood he splashed on the altar. He took the book of the covenant and read it aloud to the people and said, we are willing to obey all that Yahweh has spoken. There it is again. And look at verse 8. Does this sound familiar to anybody? And so Moses took the blood and splashed it on the people and said, this is the blood of the covenant that Yahweh has made with you in accordance with all of his words. Does that sound familiar? Anybody? And it's interesting, in this moment, Moses, in sprinkling the blood on the Israelites, is doing what? He's enacting the covenant. The blood is what brings these people into the covenant with Yahweh. And they eat in his presence, they enjoy his presence, there's peace among them, all of these things. I want you to keep those words of the blood of the new covenant. You're going to have to, again, sorry, Don, next week. I'm going to hold on to that for next week. So why all this? Why all this? Why going into all of this stuff, Christopher? Why are you going into the covenant? Because I want to focus, and what I want to do is I want to focus on 3 words for you right now. Those 3 words, if you want to write them, they're going to be up here too, are substitute, law, and covenant. These are essential for understanding, I think, the gospel. These 3 words are what tie the whole Passover together. Hold on, not yet. I'll bring it up. I got some volunteers. Hold on. I love the eagerness. This is the outflowing of what it was for. The whole Passover is because of bringing this about. And I think the order of the words, these 3 words, matter completely. If the wrong order, it all becomes twisted, and the good news is become something else if you get these 3 words out of order. So now, volunteers, I want you to come up. I'm going to have 4 volunteers for me, and you can see a little visible representation. I'm going to move this over so everybody can hopefully see it. All right, and I've got these 3 words, and all right. Here, let's have. All right, there we go. All right, I'm going to have you guys step up here. These are my. All right, so I want to ask you, you've got covenant, substitute, law. He'll be in this in a minute. So let me ask you, if you were to put these in order, this is what we got. If you were to put these in order, what order would you put them in? I mean, anybody, you can speak out. What were you saying? Was it you? Who spoke up? You put what first? I'm here. Okay, I'm here. Law, covenant. Okay, that's good. Who thinks this is the right order? Anybody? Hands. Okay. Who would put substitute first? Who'd put law first? Who has no clue? Oh, okay, good. Well, I think the proper order is not this, but switch it up. And I'll show you why. No, not, we went through this. No, you're right. I'm talking to him. You over here. No, you here. You're over here. I thought we went through this, but. That's what I was doing. No, he was moving too. As we've looked in Exodus, this is the order of what's happening in Exodus. First is Passover, the Pashach, right? There is a substitute. An animal it gives its life in the blood. It gives its life as the substitute to what? Rescue them from death and from slavery, right? The substitute is given, and they are brought to Sinai, not first to get the law, but first to receive the covenant, to be brought into relationship with Yahweh God, saying that the foundation of everything is the relationship. And now once you've been brought into relationship through that blood that brings you in, now you are called to live in light of that covenant, living out the law that he gives. Substitute, covenant, law. So why even bring this up? Let me ask you. Well, what's the picture of Jesus and the gospel? It's exactly this. Is that first and foremost in understanding that Jesus is the greater Passover lamb. That his life was given as a substitute for you and me, that his blood is shed to share his life so that we might not suffer death. That we would be freed from slavery, enslaved to what we said, what? Sin. Our master is sin, and it leads to death. He is the substitute first. In order to do what? And what we're going to see next week, I'm not going to go too far into this, but he brings them into the people. He says, this is the cup of the blood of the what? New covenant in my blood, shed for you. Jesus is inaugurating at the Last Supper the new covenant that's going to happen. We'll touch on that next week. Hold off. This is basically what everything next week's going to be about. But following that, after understanding his substitute, after being brought into relationship with him, and that being the foundation, I am now, and we are called to follow the law of Christ. To love others, to love God, to love others, and to follow after the law of Christ. Order matters in everything. Law is not something to bring us into the covenant. Law is an outflowing from it. But here's the thing, this is not often how the gospel is presented. In many churches, and even in our traditions, a lot of times, the gospel is presented in a different way. And I think this is what, and it's in all, I'm going to give you 4 different ways I think that it happens, and they all have one thing in common, is this. Go ahead. Yes, you're right. You're in the middle there. Yes. This is how we often start the gospel. This is often how we talk about Jesus. We start with a law, and we start and we say, and we'll do it in many ways. There's so many different ways we can do this. I'm going to give you one. We start with the law, and we say what? You are all sinners. There's a standard that God set up, the law for the Israelites. It doesn't matter if you've told a little white lie or you've done this or you've done that or whatever, and you've broken this law, right? And therefore, you can't get into God's presence. I mean, we say that you've broken his law. And then we say you need a substitute, Christ, dying for you, and then you can be brought into covenant. That's how it is. You make a foundation. You and I fall short. Jesus does it. He gives us a law. He says, the law or the things to do come after that. But here's the problem with this. If this is my foundation, then I am saying that following the law will bring me what? Salvation. I challenge you, go read the book of Romans, and Paul will make it clearly over and over and over that the law was never meant to what? Save. It was never meant to bring salvation. You could follow it fully and have nothing. This was not the point. When did the law show up in Exodus? After God provided. And what we do if we are not careful is we make this the basis of our salvation. Or, here's another version of it. I'm going to do this. This is a common one right here. Come on up. We do this. Second law. It's a variation of the first. You can't do it. Here's the rules. You've fallen short. Jesus did it for you. He'll bring you into covenant. And now you have another law because obviously this is way too gracious right here. This is a little too much grace. We got to dial it back again. So you have some things you have to do in order to also do your part, right? We add another law. It's too much grace. Or, go ahead, this is probably just because that word is a weird old word that we don't really know what it means, right? And a lot of times this is what we'll do just in practice. A lot of people have no idea. This idea of covenant and being in a relationship, we don't. It's kind of a foreign word, and so we'll just go, you fall short, and Jesus died for you, and now go follow this law, and you have to do these things. I mean, that's another form. Or this. And this is the very common one I see has been growing and growing and growing in the churches today. And I have to, you're right. You're just the two of you. Yes, that's okay. That's okay. We only went through this one time. That's partly my fault. This is a growing thing in our churches today. I see it happening all the time. Is this idea is that go read any passage. I don't care. Read the Sermon on the Mount. God, he says, be blessed are the poor in spirit for the kingdom of heaven. Well, you're not poor in spirit. Jesus was. Just believe in him more. He did it for you. Believe in him more, and you're good. Don't murder, don't do these things. Well, you can't stop from doing that. Jesus did it for you. Believe in him more. But notice all of these, they all start with what? The law. If the law was not meant to say, and what we'll do with this law is what we'll start to do is we say, and I think this is where we give the illustration of the gospel. We start to go, you can't do it. We say, we'll acknowledge that the law was never meant to save. It was never meant to save. But what do we do by saying Jesus did what? He lived the law perfectly, didn't he? He never failed at it. So what does he do? He becomes your substitute, and you know what he does? He takes his giving of the law, or his perfect law abiding, and does what? He gives it to you. And now you're saved. Why? Because of living in the law. We say that the law was never meant to save, but then we go, hey, Jesus lived the law perfect for you, and so he gives you his giving of the law, and now it's yours, and so therefore you're saved. That doesn't make sense. We just said that it doesn't save you. But Jesus is doing of it, it saves you. No. All right, let's get back in the right order. Now, you're going, okay, some of you, and you're probably going, hold up a second, Christopher. You're speaking a different gospel. Hold with me. I think the point is we cannot treat the law as though it is the foundation of everything. It is not the foundation. Our problem is not falling short of the law. Our problem is far, far, far deeper than that. This is an outflowing of our hearts. Not doing this is we've got a deeper problem. All that does, Paul says, is do what? Show you how sinful you are. That's all it does. Why? Because what does Romans 1 say? We have exchanged the glory of God for lesser things. We have exchanged the truth for a lie. We have not given him his proper thanks that he is due. Humanity has not done this. And what does he do? He turns us over. And we take that truth, we exchange it for something less, and then as he turns us over further, you know what we start to do? We don't even acknowledge that he exists. We don't acknowledge that he has any place in this world, and we move on from him, and it says we go into every form of wickedness. You know when the wickedness comes? Is after our hearts are shown what they are. That is our problem. We have exchanged Yahweh, the truth of God, who he is, for something lesser than what he is. And every time it will lead us to what? Slavery. You think that if you can take him and move him out of the way, you are more free. The world will tell you that you are far freer if you leave Jesus behind in that old book. Leave it behind and you will find freedom. It is a lie from the pit of hell. You will find nothing but slavery, and what your master will lead you to is death. Your master will become sin, and you will lead to death. And I'm telling you, that death is an eternal separation from God in hell. It is a real place, and you will go there if you do not follow the one who graciously gives you a way to follow him and be in community. Do not be misled. Do not let the world tell you that that's not real, because it's a falsehood. We were enslaved. We go where our master leads us, but we have one that Romans says that what? Was turned over for our transgressions. Because of our transgressions. We have a lamb who gave his blood to be shed to rescue us from that enslavement to sin. Who gave his blood to free us from the place that it leads to death. To separation from a holy God for eternity. A place that none of us want to be. Jesus, the Messiah. He rescues us from slavery and death. How? And what is our part to play? Somebody said it earlier. I think, Andy, you said it earlier. What's our part to play in this? Not this. What's our part to play? Romans chapter 4 says what? Just like Abraham in Genesis 15, he had faith in God that he was who he says he is and that he will do what he says he will do. He had faith in that God, and that was credited to him as righteousness. If you want to read more about it, go read Romans chapter 4. I won't spoil the plot too much there. He does this, the rescuing, just as he did when? In Egypt. Who does the rescuing? Jesus. And that faith credits to us as righteousness when we trust that Jesus is who he says he is. He is the part of the triune God, eternal, that he became man just like us, that he might live among us and be our representative, and that it will do what he says he will do, that he would die, that he would rise again, and that he would live forever, and he would rule, and one day he will come back and rescue us, and we will get to be with him forever. Do we believe by faith that he is who he says he is, and he will do what he says he will do? Just like Abraham, and that credited as righteousness is not more law. That's not what it is. How do I know? Because when it was credited to righteousness to Abraham, where was the law? A few hundred years in the future. It's always been about faith. It's always been about grace. This, and this, one word. It's the name of our church. First word, grace. Law always follows grace. If law is ever before grace, you've missed the boat. And we're going to see next week, because of this substitute, through our faith, he brings us into a new covenant, a better one. He is our substitute. He brings us into the new covenant, and he will call us to follow the law of Christ, to live in light of everything that he has done. It is not too much to ask to follow after Jesus. If I understand the depth of what he's done, it is a delight to follow after Jesus. Amen? Y'all can step down. Thank you. Church, do not miss this. Law always follows grace. We serve a God that says, I want you to be near. I will provide. I will do the work. I will bring you near to me. I will make it so clear that this is of me, that I will send my son to die in your place, that he will give his life, he will give his blood, and we'll talk more about that on Yom Kippur, of what that blood accomplishes in overcoming sin and breaking that. But he offers us life, freedom from death, and freedom from slavery to live to Christ. Church, if there's anyone here that does not know that Jesus, please speak to me. I do not want you to leave here today without understanding that Jesus and what that gospel is. Because without that, we have no hope. I want you to know Jesus. He's the reason why we're here. He's the one we worship in song. He's the one we worship in prayer. We worship through the word. Do you know him? Let's pray.